Hello and welcome to News Desk. I'm Alex Forrest-Whiting.
And I'm Melissa Chan.
And this week we're looking at a very hot topic in Europe, and that's migration. In fact, it's such a big issue here in Germany that the government has just introduced border controls. And that's despite it being a fully signed-up member of an agreement known as Schengen that abolishes internal border checks. So no wonder then that it's provoking quite a reaction.
Everyone knows we are operating within the framework of European law. We are utilising our options to the maximum, and that is also necessary. Everyone understands that the number of people coming to Germany irregularly is too high.
This will further limit irregular migration and protect against the acute dangers posed by Islamist terror and serious crime.
The way Germany is planning this is illegal. We will not take anyone back. There's zero leeway here.
This type of action is unacceptable from the Polish point of view, because I have no doubt whatsoever that the internal political German situation is causing these restrictions, and not our policy towards irregular migration.
So just a few thoughts there on this decision by Germany to bring in these temporary border controls. And because of all of this, we're asking this question on News Desk. Will the migration dispute break up the European Union?
And we already have some comments from the community post and also in chat that I want to share. People are quite opinionated about it. We have one user saying, quote, border controls are the most normal thing. There are also border controls in many countries in the world. Why make things difficult when European countries carry out border controls? There's also someone by the name of Barry B90. Does that mean a substantial amount of the populations across Europe are, quote, far-right fascists? Or is the left-wing, or are the left-wing parties in the EU becoming ever increasingly out of touch on the issue of mass migration and becoming far more autocratic? And we also have at JG saying the EU will perform the people's will through the democratic process. If that will is less migration, then so be it.
So quite a varied group of comments then.
Absolutely. So keep those comments coming. Throw in your questions, and I will be checking chat and bringing those questions and comments into the conversation around the table.
And talking of the table, let's introduce you to who we have around the table. First of all, we've got Thomas Sparrow. He is a DW correspondent. You focus on politics and also security, and you'll be helping us to unpack this whole issue. So thank you very much for actually being here with us. It's great to have you physically here.
It's a pleasure to be here, yeah.
Thank you. And then we have somebody who many people will perhaps recognise who watch News Desk regularly, the very great Dustin Hemmerlein, and you will be helping us also just find out how we've got to this point within Europe, looking at Germany, but also feeding in some of the statistics or bits of information that you find along the way. So thank you very much for that.
Yes.
And then also we have our very great reporter and also presenter, very much focused on politics, Jared Reed. Thank you for being here. Many people will, of course, know you as well because you are a regular. And they're very lucky today because they've got you in the chat.
That's right.
So the instructions are... keep it nice.
That's right, keep it nice. But please, a lot of you are writing in comments, but we would also really appreciate some constructive questions too. So please, please think of some constructive questions and write them in for our guests.
Yeah, that would be great. And also, we will later be joined by our Europe correspondent, Jack Parrock. He is in Brussels, and he will be giving us a bigger overview of what is going on in Europe. And just talking about those names there that we've got, Thomas Sparrow, we've got Jack Parrock. I have to, in my mind, not confuse or at any point say Jack Sparrow, which, of course, is Pirates of the Caribbean. No pirates in this stream, I'm hoping.
You know what? Just so you know, you're not the only one. That has actually also been short-circuited into my brain. And before we went into the studio, I also said this to myself. So
do not say it. Thomas, Jack, thank you.
Yeah, and just to kick things off, we have a poll that we planned. Jared, I know that you've been working on pulling that up.
Yeah.
What do we have?
All right, so we have a poll as usual, and we would love you to vote and get your opinions in. Today's question, we're asking how necessary are border checks to keep Europe safe? So the first option is essential at all times. The second, that they're okay if they're temporary. And the third one, that they make little difference. So please do get your votes in. We'll check to see how you voted at the end.
Yeah, great. Thank you very much, Jared. And just to get us started and to give us a little bit of background to this, Dustin, can you help us as to how we got to this point, particularly in Germany?
Yes. Let me give you guys the lay of the land here. Basically, what happened is that Germany started introducing border controls around its borders, and people are being checked on the borders, and that's a special thing because in the EU usually you don't have that. Even there's also a zone called the Schengen zone, which is even bigger than the EU, which usually does not have any border controls. So if you drive from Germany to a different country, there's usually no controls. And you guys can see here, that's kind of what it looks like. They're stopping people on the border, they're pulling them out, and just checking them. And what they're looking for is legal migration, and it's also supposed to be a safety measure. And Germany feels like Germany, not the population, the German government feels like it needs this safety measure because of what happened recently. So I wrote the date down so I don't get it wrong. On the 23rd of August, there was a knife attack in the city of Solingen, which we can see the aftermath of that knife attack here. The police have arrested so 3 people were killed in this knife attack. It was at like a small city party. The city was celebrating on the main square, and there was a little stage built, and in front of the stage, this person attacked 3 people and killed them and injured 2 others. The police has arrested, as you can see here, he's been taken out of the helicopter here, a 20-year-old Syrian man. He's in Germany. He came in as a migrant, as a person seeking asylum. And that's where the whole thing starts, right? Like that's where it comes from, that the German government is now like, okay, maybe this is a security issue. And what happened to this person is interesting because he came in December of 2022. And then what happens is he came in through Bulgaria. And in Europe, there's an agreement called the Dublin Agreement, which means that he should be processed as an asylum seeker in Bulgaria because that's just the state where he first appeared. But that's not what happened. He made it to Germany through Bulgaria and then entered Germany in December 2022. And Germany then sent out a request to say like, oh yeah, actually this person shouldn't be processed here. We want him to go back. And what's supposed to happen then is police should pick him up and like take him back. That's how the system is supposed to work. But he wasn't there. Police couldn't find him. And then a deadline passed. The deadline was August 2023. And that meant he was in the country so long that the Dublin Agreement said, okay, now he's in Germany. He has to be processed in Germany as a refugee. And let me just show you one thing if you guys want to share my screen. This is what I want to show you is a report from the German Migration Ministry. It just says here really big in German, aktuelle Zahlen, which means like those are the current numbers. And what I want to go down to is, so this is a long report. We can look at those statistics from maybe if they come up during the show. And this is it's a PDF document. We'll also share it in the chat. If you guys want to follow along, feel free to do that. It's in German, unfortunately, but I'm happy to translate any questions you guys have. So if I go to these Dublin free numbers, these are like the different months so far this year. The main number I want to look at is this down here, the total of people being processed in Germany under these rules. So this is 50,000 roughly people. That's how often Germany has said, oh, yeah, we have someone here who we actually want to give to a different country because they appeared in that different country first. And then of these 50,000, less than or roughly 28,000 times the other country has actually said, oh, yes, that's true. That person should be processed by us. You can send them back to us. And then the even smaller number, just below 4,000, that's how often people actually were sent back. So this is really, that's kind of a core mechanic here. And that's also what happened with this guy who attacked people in Solingen. And he was supposed to be sent back. But then if they just disappear in the system, after a while, they just are processed in Germany. And he got asylum, I'm hesitating a bit using that term because there's legally in Germany his status would not be called asylum. It's called it's a German word that's long and complicated to understand. It's called subsidiärer Schutz, which is like a different form of protection. But in the end, he was here in Germany as a refugee before the attack.
Thank you.
And and then also a second thing that plays into this dynamic. Let me just get to that.
I'll just say one quick thing, that the suspect, the Syrian suspect, I think was 26 years old.
Did I say?
I think you said 20.
Oh, sorry. No, I meant 26.
You meant 26.
26,
and I think there were... And how many people were injured? I think it was...
Was it more than 2?
I think it was more than 2. I think it was 8.
It was more than 2.
It was 8, I
yes.
think, something like that.
Yeah.
Not,
sorry.
Just so we've got it absolutely clear.
Yeah. Thanks for catching that. There's also a second incident in Bavaria. I'm not going to go into detail on that because I'm already taking up a bunch of time and we're not get to our guests and ask important questions. But a different incident where someone planned an attack on soldiers in Germany, in Bavaria. And all this has accumulated into numbers I'm going to share with you now on my screen. Those are the election results in Thuringia and Saxony, where a right-wing party, the AfD, that's the light blue bars, has really gotten high results in these regional elections. So those are not like Germany-wide elections, regional elections, and the AfD has gotten a lot of votes. And this is part of why the German government is reacting now and feels like, okay, we need to do something because a main campaign term or campaign topic for the AfD, the German far right, is migration, of course. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Dustin.
I just want to share a few comments already coming in. We have Michael Clavelli saying, without a border, there is no country. And then Memovox mentioning, and we can talk about this probably later, but Denmark has an opt-out from EU asylum politics. All EU countries should have the same or even better opt-out from the EU entirely, which would then lead to, our discussion about whether this is going to threaten the EU. So, yeah.
OK, well, thank you, and keep those coming in. Thomas, I just want to pick up on what was just being said there by Dustin and painting that whole picture, particularly about these now border controls that have been put in place. Is this a big thing?
It is a big thing. One of the users actually stressed at the beginning, you mentioned that, Melissa, that border controls are something normal, and it may be something normal in other parts of the world, but not here in the European Union. One of the main principles of the European Union, one of the biggest achievements of the European Union, is this idea that you can cross from one country to the other within the bloc without having to have these border controls. And under the Schengen Agreement, you can have border controls as long as they are officially communicated to the European Commission and as long as they are temporary. So, in fact, the German Interior Ministry did send a letter to the European Commission stressing why they believed it was a necessary measure. But it's one of the big achievements of the European Union in its history that you don't have border controls. And the fact that Germany is now making or putting these border controls in place is an even bigger issue, because Germany has been one of the staunchest defenders of the European project for a very, very long time. Germany has pegged its own stability, its own development to the stability and development of the European project. So the fact that it's Germany, as probably the most European country of all European countries, announcing these measures, that's why it's such a big topic. There are many discussions as to whether this is effective, whether it will achieve the goals that the government has set in place.
We'll talk about those a bit later.
But there's no doubt this is a big story, hence that reaction coming from other European leaders.
And we'll talk to our Brussels correspondent about that in a moment. But just sticking with Germany, I just want to ask you, the reasons why the government's put it in place to do with these terrorist situations that happened that Dustin was telling us about. Is it that, or is it the fact that the far right are doing particularly well in Germany, particularly in eastern Germany? We just saw the results of those recent regional elections. Why has the German government done it now?
3 points that I would highlight. One, migration is the biggest concern for German voters. That's according to several surveys. In fact, a national survey only recently put migration as the biggest challenge for Germany. Second, the fact that security is now an absolutely central topic. We spoke here about Solingen, we spoke about other security incidents. So these two elements combined. And the third element, you mentioned it already, Alex, the fact that the far-right AfD did extremely well in those regional elections. It's very important to mention it's not only that they did extremely well, but it was the first time since the Second World War that a far-right party in Germany wins a regional election. It happened in Thuringia, and that was obviously a very big shock. It was not unexpected, but it was still a very big shock for many here in the country. So the reaction coming from the German government is a mixture of those three elements.
Yep.
And it's important maybe for those viewers who are not based in Germany or in Europe, but the AfD, the success of the party, of that far-right party, has been entirely based since it was founded in 2013, a few years later. It became so popular in Germany because of the issue of migration, because of its anti-immigrant stance, because they were the party that managed to really be the party that was presenting all these anti-migrant positions. So when you see these measures now by the German government, when you see the policies that the opposition also want to present, the conservative opposition, they are also a reaction to these gains by the far-right AfD.
And of course, you've got some comments.
Yeah, I mean, it's just someone responding to all of what we've been talking about at Evil Dude saying, so Germany really wants to lock down the whole country because of one non-German, sort of suggesting that there's an overreaction as a result of these attacks. And also,
Well, hold that thought, I was going to say, because what that user is saying chimes in with a little bit of interview that we've got from the mayor of a town that is in Germany but on the border with France. It's called Saarbrücken. And he's just talking about these checks. And the spoiler alert, as I've kind of given it away, is he's not happy about what Germany has done. So let's just have a listen to what he has to say.
So you get the impression that this is more of a symbolic showcase campaign. In my opinion, it's highly doubtful this will do anything to combat illegal migration. We need to secure the external borders of the European Union. We need open borders within the European Union. It's just apparent that a border control between Germany and France here, where we have a green border with countless border crossings, could never be chosen if the goal is to prevent illegal border crossings or illegal migration. This is an unsuitable method that puts a serious burden on economic and cultural relations between Germany and France, especially in the border region.
So big question there. Is he right? I mean, do these border controls work? Do they stop terrorists and criminals coming into countries?
If you ask the government, the answer is yes. In fact, they have stressed that in 2023, they managed to prevent the entry of about 35,000 people into Germany who would otherwise have entered the country irregularly. So the government clearly believes that border controls are the best way forward. If you ask experts, if you ask people on the border, they would be a bit more critical about this. On the one hand, they say that you would need much more personnel, many more police officers to actually control a border that is open, that is full of holes. Some even describe it as a sort of Swiss cheese full of holes. There are others who say that that's not where the focus should be, that the focus should actually be on the external borders of the European Union, that the focus should be on trying to work directly, for example, with the countries of origin, that the focus should be in trying to prevent the root causes of migration instead of preventing people from coming into Germany when they'd already entered some of the other European countries. So you have a wide range of opinions here, from those who believe that border checks are necessary and important, maybe not in a permanent way, in a flexible way like the government has presented.
Because this is 6 months, isn't it, only that the government has so far said?
6 months, it's flexible, it's not permanent in the border, so it doesn't mean that every single person crossing the German-Danish border or the German-French border or the German-Austrian border will be controlled. It's something that is basically flexible and depending on the specific situation. And that, again, is something that people stress, critics stress, doesn't make any sense because it won't deter people from coming into the country if they want to come irregularly. They simply don't choose where the controls are. They go, I don't know, a few blocks further and try entering the country then. I'm not going to say what's the best way here. I can tell you that there are different opinions and the government has very clearly stated that they believe that border controls are necessary and that in the past they have worked.
Thank you. Let's bring in Jack Parrock, who is our Brussels correspondent, covering Europe, in Brussels at the moment. Jack, hopefully you can hear us because there you are, great. I just wanted to put all this to you. You've been listening to the conversation so far. Surely closed borders goes against the whole concept of the EU and freedom of movement. Thomas was just talking about that and how big a deal it is that it is Germany that's done this. But what has been the response across the EU? Has anybody spoken out and said that they're happy or not happy about this decision by Germany?
I mean, they certainly have, but for different reasons. And this is where it gets really complex. For instance, the Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk came out and said this is completely unacceptable because there's a lot of border movement between Poland and Germany, obviously. The Luxembourg foreign minister said, listen, between Germany and Luxembourg, 53,000 people travel across that border every single day, and another 50,000+ from France. Most of the workforce of Luxembourg, the city of Luxembourg, comes in from Germany and France every day. Controlling those people is an enormous operation. The Luxembourgers said, listen, we've had guarantees from Germany that this isn't going to be something that's going to really stop the border region traffic. Also, if you've ever driven from Belgium to Strasbourg, for instance, you go through France, Luxembourg, and all the way through there, you drive through these different countries all the time, multiple borders, which was the whole point, really, in trying to bring down borders and why it's such a sort of key issue for the EU. Now, from an EU side, the organization, the institution which is in charge of keeping borders open, or is enforcing what's called the Schengen Code, which is the Schengen area, which is the border-free area. That's the European Commission here in Brussels. They've been asked about the Germany issue, whether they would try and enforce or bring some infringement procedures. I've spoken to tons of different legal experts who say that essentially these border checks and the way that Germany has brought them in is actually not really in line with either the spirit or the word of the Schengen Code, because they've done it too quickly, they haven't done a proper notice period, etc., etc. But the European Commission doesn't like to take on countries and start legal processes against them, even if they don't really abide by the rules, because what they fear is that that creates tension with Brussels. And then instead of the countries being able to negotiate these issues, try and work together, it becomes the capitals of the EU versus the institutions in Brussels. And they don't want that to happen. And that's kind of where we are at the moment.
So will there be a chain reaction, do you think, to this? Are other countries now going to say, well, if Germany's doing it, we're going to start doing it?
Well, I mean, you saw one of the very interesting other reactions was from the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who welcomed the Chancellor Olaf Scholz to his anti-immigration club on Twitter, or X, or whatever it's called now. And
Jack,
he,
actually,
so you're seeing.
Let me pull up the tweet from Viktor
Please.
Orban right now. We can show that while you talk.
Yeah. So he's, very anti-immigration, as you can see. He welcomed him to the club. And this is it. This is the question. There's a lot of anti-immigration countries. If you look at the politics in Italy, which have outsourced their agreements to potentially bring Albania to do their processing for them. They're setting up a processing site outside of the EU. This is welcome. These ideas of trying to stop asylum seekers from crossing borders is welcome. And on top of that, I don't know whether this is too soon to get into it, but we've recently had an enormous overhaul of EU migration policy. This Dublin agreement, the numbers Dustin was looking at there was so interesting for me. I've actually never seen those numbers in that way before, because Dublin has been enforced for some time, where the first place an asylum seeker is clocked, for want of a better expression, in the EU, that's where they should be processed. Anecdotally, from journalists that I've met and from my own experience in different EU countries following migration for the last 10 years, probably too long, have been around Brussels, and also heading all over the EU. There are some countries which just kind of wave people through, right? Yeah. And there are other countries like Germany and Austria who really enforce Dublin and try to work through the system to send people back. That system's now been voted down to be overhauled for a new system of sharing the burden and moving people around the EU that's meant to come into force in 2026. But the question is, with all of this going on, with the borders going up, with Germany having to deal with far-right surges in political elections, with Spain, there's so many different issues. I think we're going to get into a few more of them. Will the agreement that was made and signed off and voted through all 27 EU countries in April to overhaul that system that's been such a headache for the EU for the last few decades, will the changes they've made, the implementation by 2026, will that not be soon enough? That's the big question of the moment in circles in Brussels.
Yes, because, I mean, we've already, haven't we, recently had complaints from Greece pointing the finger again at Germany, saying, we don't want to take these people back. It's not fair that just because they were processed first in Greece, that you're now saying they've got to come back. So the system, Thomas, it doesn't seem to be particularly working well, does it, at the moment?
Yeah, and there's I was going to say, and there's a lot of frustration. I think it's very interesting to hear what both Thomas and Jack have been saying, because you guys are talking about policy, but when we look at chat, it's a very emotional issue. I just want to share a couple of other comments from Jay Cortez. Enough is enough. Stop allowing the crazy migration numbers. Take care of your citizens first. And then we have Carolina Vienna, who's saying that she is torn between humanity versus security. So this is not an easy thing. There's policy challenges, and then there's the emotional reaction that a lot of people are having.
And the thing, Melissa, is when you have such an emotional topic, such a topic that is so controversial, it makes it very difficult for politicians, wherever they are, to make decisions that will ultimately be very effective. This is a topic that has been going on for a very long time. This is not a new topic. All this discussion about Dublin and about EU migration laws and so on has been going on for a very long time. We've had this discussion for years now, and it is a topic that not only here in Germany, but in most other European countries, probably not in all, but in most other European countries, is extremely controversial. It's extremely emotional. That is problematic on the one hand, because it plays really into the hands of parties like here in Germany, like the AfD, the far-right AfD. Precisely, they tap into those emotions, they tap into those fears that people have, they tap into those insecurities. But second, it makes rational discussions and debates on a political side extremely complicated. Yeah. So we're not talking here about a topic. There are several other topics in the EU that are dry, difficult to understand, but probably not very controversial. This here is the controversial issue, and that explains why, for example, from a German perspective, it is topic number one on people's minds.
Well, on that point, let's just listen to some what we call vox pop, so people out on the street, actually in eastern Germany, just talking about this issue of migration, and then we can discuss more about those emotions. Let's just have a listen.
Migration is a deep concern for people here in Saxony. Our resources are limited and we must face up to that.
Migration for me, because it's too much, too many. They get money easily, and meanwhile, for us pensioners, the pensions. And energy prices are on the rise. Those are the pressing issues for us.
Those are the pressing issues for us, and I guess...
Can I just play the German on the table and say, like, you know, this region of Germany, and we talked about this before the show as well, like, a lot of people there just feel like after the reunification of Germany, like this is the former DDR, actually, I don't know the English abbreviation, but
GDR.
The former GDR, so the former part of communist part of Germany, right, or the left-wing social part of Germany that was reunified with Germany in 1990. And a lot of people from that region still feel like they come second in everything, right? Like there's a strong feeling like, why is the west of Germany richer than we are? Why does everyone else get everything first? And they feel like they've been left behind. And then now the feeling is, why are newcomers to Germany, people who are just coming in, getting anything if we are still
getting ahead of the
being
line.
left behind. And that's the kind of just the emotion this is coming from. And it's an emotion that's been built for a long time now.
And I just think it's important, like we've been using the word feel that they've been left behind, but they are being left behind too. I mean, not to invalidate their emotions as something that's like completely unfounded, which makes the issue very complex.
It is definitely complex. I understand your point when you say that they have been left behind. If you ask the German government, they would say that over the last 30-odd years, they've tried to close the gaps. There are still several gaps. There are still many important issues where East and West are not on a level playing field, from pensions to salaries to other issues as well. And that also feeds that insecurity coming from the East in particular that Dustin mentioned, the fact that many do indeed feel second-class citizens. What's interesting about the East is migration may be the topic that's on everyone's minds, as we just saw there. But if you go through some of those villages or cities in the East, they have very few migrants. Right. Why am I mentioning this? Because perception is an absolutely important element here. There's a perception in Germany and in other European countries that migration is a very big problem, that migration is behind, for example, crime numbers in Germany. It's a perception that is also playing a vital role in what parties people vote for. Yeah. If you go to the facts, if you go to the actual statistics, the picture is a little bit more complex. Some would pick up some numbers that point on why migrants are behind certain crimes in Germany. Others would focus on different aspects. And that, again, becomes an extremely polarized emotional issue. So you have parties on the left saying one thing, parties on the right saying something else, parties in the center trying to moderate the discussion. And it basically means every single party on the political spectrum positions itself when it comes to the issue of migration. Yeah. It becomes basically a terribly difficult area to have any sensible discussion, simply because it is extremely emotional and it is extremely based on perceptions more than, in certain cases, at least on reality.
And just at that point, talking about, you know, the perception and people are coming in and actually not so many in the East, just overall, Dustin, we have the latest statistics, don't we, from the European Union Agency for Asylum. Could you just bring those up?
Let me pull this up 1 second.
Because this is, well, you can explain it, but it's the number of migrants that have come into the EU plus Norway plus Switzerland so for the first 6 months of the year. And my understanding is that actually the numbers slightly fell this year, not by a huge amount, but they were down than what they were on the previous term by about 6,000. I think you're still trying to find... Have you got it?
Yes, I got it. Yes. So what you can see, this is what you mean, right?
Yes.
Like, yeah. What you can see here is like where people are coming from, like to which country in the EU. It's probably going to be very small. So I'm going to zoom in a bunch so you guys can see anything. Let me zoom in on Germany first. So here you can see Germany, and then the big bubble and below is Afghanistan as the country where people are coming from. And the big bubble, if I hover over it, you can see that in the first half of 2024, 42% of all applications from Afghanistan were lodged in Germany. So this is like EU-wide, from all countries where people are coming from, how many percent of people from a certain place did end up in which country. And if the bubble is big, you can basically...
Because I think I'm right in saying, and just looking from that, it looks like most people have headed to Germany who came in the past.
There's one thing that I have to add here, because if we look at what the German government has been doing in recent weeks, there's one important element when it comes to Afghanistan. And the fact that you mentioned those statistics, Dustin, reflect why the German government announced, after several years, to restart deportation flights to Afghanistan. They had one flight with failed asylum seekers, convicted criminals from Afghanistan. That is, within this whole phenomenon, within this whole discussion, another very contentious issue. There are those who say those flights have to restart because we're talking here of convicted criminals, people who are not allowed to stay in Germany. There are others who say, especially human rights organizations, that are very, very critical of this because they say a country like Germany cannot send failed asylum seekers to a country like Afghanistan that is not safe, that goes against international law, that goes against all sorts of international regulations. The German government, however, has indicated that working with some of the countries in the region around Afghanistan, they were able to restart these deportation flights. It was a highly symbolic move from the German government. Problematic, definitely, but also highly symbolic, because what they were trying to show with that is that at a time when things are very difficult in the country, this was planned for a long time, but nevertheless, the fact that it came in this whole debate means that the German government was for a long time already planning to restart some of these deportation flights. That's another element of this very difficult migration debate.
But just going back to that graph quickly, you can see, if we can just share the screen again, you can see that the biggest bubbles seem to be on the Germany line. Can we just see that again? Is it possible just to share?
There we go.
So look, if you Germany, can you just highlight with your?
How about Germany?
Yeah, Germany. And then if you swipe,
go to the right,
swipe across to the right, the biggest, keep going, the biggest bubbles are all Germany, aren't they? So it just shows that it's still a very popular destination for migrants.
And guys, we're sharing these links in the chat, so you can totally, because this is really one that's kind of hard to show on this screen, right? But if you really want to click on that link, look at it for yourself, it's good, because if you hover over one of the bubbles, you get a little explanation of where people are coming from. It's really interesting to dive deeper into these statistics.
Yeah, I want to share a few more comments. A pamphleteer saying, acknowledging the policy challenges of this, saying that national border checks can only be intermediate steps to reinforcing the EU borders. Nonetheless, the problem will only be solved when only admitted asylum seekers may enter the EU. But as you said, this is a resource problem. There's a lot of things that the government needs to do in order for all of the pieces to fall in place and make that happen.
And if you look, for example, at the German conservative opposition, so the CDU-CSU political group, which is the biggest opposition group in the German parliament, they have said that the German government is not doing enough. Basically, what they are saying is that asylum seekers shouldn't be even let in to Germany in the first place, especially if the possibility of them being able to stay in Germany is very low. All this under the Dublin Agreement.
Yeah.
Whereas the German government has stressed, OK, maybe they're going to reinforce police presence or other presence at the German border to make sure that they can speed up asylum processes, to make sure that those who are not allowed to stay can then be sent back. This is, if you look into the whole policy discussion, you could spend days actually looking at all those documents and trying to understand.
Some people have spent years, right?
Years, trying to understand what one party wants and what the other party is against. But essentially, and just to give you maybe viewers another example of how contentious this is, talks between the government coalition here in Germany, so the three-party coalition between the Liberals, the Greens, and the Social Democrats, and the Conservative bloc actually collapsed. So actually, they broke down simply because they couldn't come to any agreement. Now, you may ask, why do you need to have these talks in the first place? And that has to do with a very complicated system here in Germany, whereby some of the migration decisions are actually not made by the government here in Berlin, by the federal government, but by regional governments in the different parts of Germany. And some of those regional governments, who's leading them? Members of the opposition.
Yes.
So, in other words, if you want to have a migration situation in the country, which is, as the government wants, more controlled and more stable, you not only need to work within the government coalition, three parties that are already...
at loggerheads.
Yes, exactly. You also need to include, at least to a large extent, the opposition to try and find common agreement.
Well, thank you. Let's just bring in Jack Parrock, who's in Brussels. And I'm sure, Jack, you've got a lot to say. I just want to ask you quickly about other EU countries that have been sounding the alarm over this whole issue of migration and fear. And I know that you have been reporting about this issue over the past few days, but you focused quite a bit last week on the Dutch government. Can you just tell us what they have come up with and what they have decided?
I mean, what the Dutch government's proposing makes sort of Germany's border checks look very soft and sweet, frankly. The Dutch government, which was voted in and is one of the largest party, basically, is the PVV party, which is a far-right party of the sort of infamous far-right Geert Wilders in the Netherlands. He's actually not in the government. He's not a minister or the prime minister, but he's really the backer of this thing and sort of steering a lot of the policy. they announced what they called the strictest asylum policy ever. They want forced returns. They want no new asylum applications at all. No one's allowed to enter. That's what they're saying until all of the backlog of asylum applications are processed. They want to end things like family reunification. Normally, if your mum gets asylum in an EU country, you can be reunified with them. They want to end that for adult applicants. Small children would obviously be able to be reunified, but generally people take their small children with them when they make a journey for an asylum application, because minors pretty much always get refugee protected status in different countries. So that's the Dutch picture, and actually it's kind of emblematic of what's happening across the board. There are a couple of things I'd like to pick up on, if I may, that have been discussed. And the first one is about where the people come from, and that was kind of what was in Dustin's graph. You touched there on Afghanistan. When we talk about the EU's issues of migration, we've seen well over 4 million Ukrainians cross the border since the start of the war and get protected status, predominantly in Hungary, but also in Germany, Belgium, where I am, Slovakia, Czechia, etc. And really, this issue has not been such a big... There are issues about the Ukrainians that have temporary protected status in the European Union. But the issue of migration in Europe, and a lot of NGOs would say this and sort of ring the racism bell, essentially, potentially correctly, because it is people that are coming from countries like Afghanistan, from Syria, from sub-Saharan Africa, that are considered to bring the problems into the EU, specifically people from Muslim origin countries as well. And that is something that is often sort of either not addressed or not really spoken about too clearly. And the other thing I wanted to talk about when we talk about numbers, a lot of the NGOs, the migration NGOs, we talk about the migration crisis of 2015, which was when Germany, Angela Merkel, the former chancellor, decided to open up, and Germany took in 1 million asylum seekers from Syria, basically. The story is wider than that, but let's just say that as the sort of overarching story of what happened. Those numbers, when you talk about 1 million, when you look at other migrations in other parts of the world, 1 million people is really not very many. 7 million Venezuelans, I think, are known to be in protected status in countries around the world. If you look at the Sudanese refugees who've had to leave there in Africa, even in South Africa, I think has hosted millions of Zimbabweans for many, many years, and from other countries down in Southern Africa as well. A lot of the migration experts that I speak to always sort of bristle when we call it a European migration crisis, because the numbers that Europe faces are actually very minimal compared to other parts of the world.
Thank you, Jack. Just Thomas was desperate to jump in there.
I was desperate to jump in with one point, because I have to disagree slightly with Jack on one issue when he mentions the Ukrainian aspect. I agree wholeheartedly that the problem, at least for many in Germany and other European countries, is not with the Ukrainian refugees or asylum seekers, but with those coming from countries like Syria or Afghanistan. However, when you ask here in Germany what the problems are related to migration, many do speak about offices being completely full, German bureaucracy not being able to keep up with all the asylum applications, that there's not enough money to deal with all this. And in that sense, the fact that so many Ukrainians have arrived to Germany or have come to Germany and to other countries does play into the narrative that basically the country is overwhelmed, that the country can't deal with the challenge of migration.
I would totally agree with you there.
Can I play devil's advocate and just... I do agree that racism plays... sorry, Jack. Did you want to say
He said
more?
he agreed, completely agreed with you.
Yes, right, OK.
I totally agree with what Tom said.
Yeah, no, I wanted to just play devil's advocate a little bit about the racism issue. Absolutely there. Is there just a slight difference in the sense that Europeans view Ukrainians as future members of the EU because they are on that path and they are also on the path to joining NATO? I mean, that's just one generous interpretation of people seeing a difference, perhaps?
Do you want me to answer? Do you want Jack to answer?
I don't know. I'm looking at Thomas, so maybe yes.
To a large extent, I think yes, but I would say those who are critical of migration in Germany, especially those coming from the far right, see the dangers not only in those who are coming, but in where those people are coming from, and the fact that they do not share the same religion, that they do not share the same culture, that they do not share the same, even the same continent, if we look at that in a broader perspective. So from that side of things, I do think that for Germans in particular, the fact that so many Ukrainians have come is not necessarily a problem, because they do see Ukraine, at least most of them. If you look at the fringes, not necessarily in the political spectrum, but most Germans would consider Ukraine to be potentially a European Union member along the line, that they would see Ukraine as being part of the wider European family. They do not think the same thing about Afghanistan or Syria. So it's that idea that maybe Ukrainian, I'm not saying I agree with this, I actually don't, but for many, maybe if you consider what are the important refugees, the ones that are okay to stay here in the country, that's the Ukrainians. The ones who are not necessarily okay to stay here in the country because they're completely different in those people's view are those from Syria or Afghanistan or other countries. I'm just sharing the views that you often hear from people, especially in places where the anti-immigrant sentiment is very hard. If you ask them, do you agree that Ukrainians should come to Germany? You would probably hear a yes. If you ask them, do you agree that Syrians or Afghanistans fleeing the conflicts there would come to Germany? The probable answer that you will get is no.
And legally, you should not be discriminating.
And legally, you should not be discriminating, because according to international law, agreements that Germany and several other countries have signed, most countries have signed, if someone flees from a conflict or a war, if someone is facing political, religious or ideological persecution, those people have a right to apply for asylum, and they have a right to also enter the country and wait for their asylum procedure to be carried out in full and at length and so on. So that's why the whole discussion is also so important.
There's just one comment that is kind of a question for you, following up on that point, from Barbara Barbeski, commenting that Germans should stop giving money right away and making it easier for those who arrive to abuse the system. Is that the case, that people show up and right away receive money? Because that's something that we hear, and we're seeing a lot of these comments in chat.
If you read the German tabloids, then you will probably believe that that's the case. Every now and then you have articles of people abusing the system, and I would agree to a certain extent that that's a problem, but only to a certain extent. And the German government has reacted to that by saying, for example, that in certain cases they will reduce the social benefits that migrants receive, or in other cases they are even implementing a card, so a debit card for people to use instead of granting them cash, essentially so they can use the money in Germany, not send the money back as a remittance to their own countries. So the German government has reacted to these kinds of measures. I would not necessarily say that people are abusing it. Most of the people who come to Germany are in desperate need and actually do need some kind of assistance, but it is part of the political debate, with members of the opposition saying that, especially with asylum seekers that are, let's say, failed asylum seekers that do not have the right to stay, that the social aspect and the money aspect and the funds that they receive should be reduced to the absolute basic.
Minimum.
Again, you have human rights organizations basically raising alarm bells and saying that can't be the case.
Thank you very much, Thomas. Let me just bring Jack back into this, because, Jack, I know even today you have been reporting on the migration situation that's going on, this time looking at Moroccans who've been trying to get into a Spanish enclave. We've got some pictures. It's a Ceuta, I think I've pronounced that correctly, and we've got some pictures that we can play now. And these, I think, came from the weekend, and we see migrants in the hills there trying to climb up to get over the other side of the border so that they could breach the border fence into the Spanish enclave, which is obviously a major entry point for people trying to get in. And then a little bit later on, you see actually some of the Moroccan police, here we are, being quite violent with some of these migrants who are trying to get in. Just fill us in on the picture on that, because that seems to be the latest hot spot of this whole...
Looks like there's a dog as well.
Yeah, oh yes, putting the dog on them. Just fill us in of what you yourself know about this, Jack.
Well, we have a wonderful colleague, Jan-Philipp Scholz, who filed a report from Ceuta talking to some of the people that actually made their way into this little bit of land, which is sort of in Morocco, basically, but it's Spanish. And you saw in the videos there, the fences around it. Essentially, anyone from the African continent can therefore move by land and get onto European soil. So these enclaves, Ceuta and Melilla, which are both next to Morocco, basically on the same sort of land as Morocco, have long been a problem. And in the report that Jan-Philipp filed and has been playing out, and people can, I'm sure, find across DW's online presence and on TV and stuff, he's talking to people that are swimming out to sea, 8 hours sometimes swimming to get back in. It's so extreme what people are having to go through to get there. Now, the European Union supported Morocco back in March of 2023 with a deal of over 600 million euros in order to try and support their economy and try and beef up their border guards to prevent that from happening. We've had senior EU politicians say that they will not give up on this piece of European land that is on the African continent, and that they will support the Spanish authorities in order to defend it. In the last couple of weeks, we've had statements to that nature. What's really interesting is Ceuta sort of comes up every now and again as a place where they try and get people in. And other times it's Lampedusa, the island in the middle of the Mediterranean, where people are trying to get in. And this is something that perhaps we haven't talked about so much, especially in the last week or so when the German borders went up. And we've been talking about the internal borders of the EU. There's still this discussion about the externalization of migration, the plans by the European Union to protect the EU's external borders, to help countries like Greece, Italy, and Spain to do so. But also what we've seen just through over the last decade, it started that the people were coming on the boats in 2015 from Turkey onto the Greek islands. It's the shortest bit, really, of the Mediterranean Sea to leave Turkey to get in. And that's because Turkey still hosts 3 million odd refugees, Syrian refugees, that cross the border to flee the war there and are living in Turkey. The EU agreed a deal to give billions of euros to Turkey to keep them there. They stayed. The Turkish government stopped on the border. So the EU decided, right, we'll look at other countries, Tunisia, Morocco, and have done multi-million billion-dollar deals with some of these different countries in order to get them to do the same. But they don't quite play ball in the same way that Turkey did in order to do it. And this also raises a human rights question about what sort of autocratic leaders the EU is giving money to deal with issues that have very sensitive human dimension and human rights dimensions to them as well. And one of the things that the expressions that's used often with this is it's like a sort of balloon as well. If you squeeze and tighten on one area, people, the migrants that left Sudan or perhaps Senegal, they didn't intend to get to Morocco. They were aiming to get predominantly to countries like Germany. So if they can't get through on a boat leaving Tunisia or through Turkey and over the border into Bulgaria, they will then go to Ceuta, and there are smugglers that help them to do that.
Find another way.
And so I think it's really important keep our eye on that. Yeah, what's happening outside of Europe as well.
Can we pull the map up of that place?
Yeah, we can. I was also going to share...
While we do that, let's just find out what's going on in the chat, because we're a bit late to that, Jared. Sorry about that. What is going on?
That's all right. I mean, it is, as you can imagine, it's a really divisive topic today. So lots and lots of opinions going around. Yeah, I guess a lot of people calling for... I guess, stricter migration, controlled, stable migration policies. I'll read out a couple of comments that stood out to me. J-Bag, who I think has left the chat now, said, there's a sense that for whatever reasons of migration, sometimes there are no good options. It's just like lesser levels of bad ones. And someone else said, just to look at the other side of the argument, asylum and migration, this is sort of what you were talking about earlier, Thomas, happens through political chaos or economic issues, finding a way to reduce these. So tackling the root causes of migration can also make some sense.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Jared. Yeah, do keep us, both of you, let us know what's going on.
Let me
Keep those
share.
questions coming, yeah.
Did you? Yes, you
Well,
wanted to...
I don't have the map ready yet, but I wanted to share something else, just because to support Jack's point that he made earlier. If these are the migration flows in all of Europe, and as you can see, like the numbers really are. Like this is the million he was talking about before, right? Like this is when 2015, when there were lots of migration, and this is what it is now. So it has gone up in 2023. I can zoom in on that. And these colors are the different routes that people take to come into Europe. But I think it's just striking if we zoom out, right? It's just striking how much the size of the problem has changed, right? Like even though perception really tells us it's the main problem now, it was a way bigger influx of people back then. Yeah. And
you can find that when you get a chance. I do just want to move on the discussion a little bit. We've been talking about the sort of the fear of migration and perception and what's going on at the border internally within Germany, but also externally. But of course, we also know that a big problem for Europe, for countries like Germany, is that they really need skilled labour. They need people to come in. They need migrants, ageing population. They've got a falling birth rate. And over the last few days, we've seen that the German Chancellor, Olaf Scholz, has agreed or made some agreements with a couple of countries over this, Kenya and also Uzbekistan. We can look at Kenya as an example. Thomas, I hope you can join us on this, because they made an agreement, that was Olaf Scholz and also Kenya's President William Ruto, to agree for a certain number, we talk about that in a moment, of Kenyans to come in to Germany to help fill the gaps. At the same time, Kenya welcoming back Kenyans who have overstayed their time in Germany, so they go back. And we can actually listen to Olaf Scholz now explaining why this is a very good deal for Germany.
The agreement opens up prospects for Kenyans because skilled workers or young people can come to Germany for training. This can help us compensate for the blatant shortage of skilled workers, the initial effects of which we are now feeling and which will be with us for years and decades to come.
So it sounds like it's a win-win deal for Germany, but that's not quite the story, is it? Because still this caused quite a lot of backlash within some of these opposition parties that you're talking about.
Absolutely. All this is the other side of the political debate. So one side of the political debate has to do with asylum. The other side of the political debate has to do with skilled migration. And in that particular case, Germany is more than happy to have skilled workers come into the country from different parts of the world. So the agreements that have been signed with Uzbekistan and with Kenya are not only signed with Uzbekistan and Kenya. There are several other countries around the world where similar agreements have either been signed or are being discussed. And the two components are the ones you mentioned, Alex. On the one hand, trying to get skilled or semi-skilled workers from those countries. On the other hand, making sure that those who are not entitled to stay can return. And at least from the German government's perspective, they are presenting this as sort of the way forward.
Yeah.
They look at countries around the world that have, in a way, a surplus of skilled workers. They try and have agreements with them, and they then return some of those who are not allowed to stay. The caveat, the main problem with that, is that the numbers of those who are not allowed to stay are comparatively low. So they're only basically resolving part of the problem. They're resolving those who are coming to the country, but not necessarily those who are here irregularly.
Yeah.
Specifically on Kenya, there was a very big debate in the last few days here in the country, but also in Kenya, by the way, because a number was mentioned of Kenyans that would then basically be unlocked to work in Germany. In fact, that was something that the Kenyan leader himself said in a DW interview, 250,000.
The DW interview, 250,000 Kenyans coming to Germany.
Yeah, he said it will unlock
okay.
jobs for 250,000 Kenyans. That was picked up by international media outlets saying 250,000 Kenyans are now going to come to Germany. You can imagine the reaction from the far right. They then picked up those international news stories saying, oh my God, 250,000 Kenyans coming to Germany. The German Interior Ministry had to basically deny those reports and say that these agreements, and in particular the one with Kenya, are not pegged to any specific number. So,
and the president's got it wrong. The Kenyan president has got it wrong.
You can imagine the debate around these agreements. around this agreement in particular. But this is one, at least, element that the German government, and not only the German government, we heard from Jack, that's also something that's being done a little bit different, but still at the European level, basically looking at countries around the world with which agreements can be made. And that's the other side of the political debate when it comes to migration.
Not to put you on the spot, but what are the other countries that Germany already has an agreement with of this similar type beyond Kenya and Uzbekistan?
I know, for example, of Colombia, another country that is part of the group of countries, let's say, that Germany is looking to form or to sign these agreements. There are several others in different continents around the world. So it's not only focusing, let's say, on Sub-Saharan Africa or on Central Asia or on Latin America. Basically, there's a migration commissioner here in Germany. There's usually a migration commissioner, but the migration commissioner has been going to the different embassies, traveling to the different countries, making sure that these kind of agreements can be planned so that when the German chancellor or the German foreign minister go to these countries, these agreements can be signed. And basically, from a German government's perspective, this is seen as a positive way to get some of those skilled workers to fill some of the gaps that Germany, and by the way, not only Germany, if you go to the UK, Germany, for example, to other countries in Europe, this sort of lack of skilled workers is a very big problem, and that's the way they are trying to basically deal with it.
Thank you. Jack, you mentioned earlier about Italy and this sort of relationship it's currently having with Albania. Is that a way that they are trying to get the migrants that they want but keep out the ones that they don't, because then it's all processed in Albania? Is that what the thinking is there?
Yeah. Well, that system is just to try and outsource the processing. So essentially, what would happen is a migrant would arrive on the Italian coast from Lampedusa. They would be transferred by the Italian authorities to this processing centre in Albania, which the Albanians have agreed to set up. We're kind of waiting at the moment to see when it gets going. I press most weeks on the Albanian authorities to find out if it's ready yet. And they've sort of, it's not ready yet, essentially. It's not functioning and it isn't expected to. And then, but when it is, they'll be transferred there. Italian asylum officers in Albania will do a processing to see whether their case is valid to be granted a protection status in Italy. If it's approved, that person will then move from the detention centre in Albania and be brought to Italy with legal protection. And if not, the Albanians will deal with sending them elsewhere.
Okay,
that's
so it's a bit different.
Sort of overarching sense.
It's a bit different, a different way of dealing with it. But I guess across the EU, it's not just Germany where we've got this problem with an ageing population, a falling birth rate. Still, they need skilled or semi-skilled migrants or people to come and work and to fill those jobs that are currently vacant.
Do you know what? This is where it gets really interesting. And this is where the sort of spectrum of expat to migrant worker to whatever you consider yourself to be. I myself am a migrant, a Brit who moved 11 years ago to Belgium as, you know, a migrant worker, essentially. I'm now naturalized as a Belgian. I am part of this migration thing myself, I suppose, in some sense, especially post-Brexit. But what you were talking about there is the labor shortages as well. Is this, so recent stats say that 75% of employers in 21 European countries in 2023 were unable to find workers equipped with the right skills. That's up from 42% in 2018. We just had an economic report from Mario Draghi, the former Italian Prime Minister, who was commissioned by the EU to look into this issue of economics and how to be competitive. And really, most economists would tell you the EU, with an aging population, needs workers. But the issue is that the migrants that are coming from countries like Afghanistan, Syria, Iraq, from sub-Saharan Africa are not often considered the right sort of migrants to fill those jobs, which are often sort of skilled jobs, things like welders and labourers that actually sort of, I can't remember what it's called, like fire cutters or something, that they're very specific and highly trained jobs. And so instead they're searched for elsewhere. I mean, Kenya being one of those examples. But the optics of that.
Sorry,
Doctors,
carry on,
of course,
yeah.
and those sort of really high skills. But it's welders that are the number one most needed in the EU, according to recent statistics, from what I've seen.
Well, welders of the world.
This is interesting as well. Yeah, just to touch on this, and Thomas was talking about this a little bit as well. This is where it gets interesting for me, I think. Ahead of the European Parliament elections in June this year, migration was the 7th most important factor that voters stated in surveys by Eurostat of why they were voting in those elections. Number one, as pretty much always universally across the board, unless you live in a dictatorship or something, is the economy and your job. And there are hundreds of other things. There are many other things that came in there. So health was a big one. We were off the back of the COVID-19 pandemic. But as Tom was talking about, if you look at the election campaigns that are fought on, it's all about migration, but also how migration affects you and your job.
Yes.
So it's brought in by political actors to talk about how migration is affecting your bottom lines in your household income. And so they play on that top issue for the electorate, which is how much money people have.
I want to now just try and come up with something that might be a little bit more positive, if that is possible. Do you think, Jack, that there is a solution at EU level to this whole migration issue? Is there anything that can be done that will try to put this to bed so it isn't becoming the top issue that's being fought politically, but that is something that people are feeling a little bit calmer about?
I really appreciate your attempt to make a positive note, but I wouldn't say that trying to find European unity on migration is where we'll find it. Reason being, I mean, in April last year, they agreed an overhaul of the migration and asylum system that would allow countries, for instance, like Hungary, super anti-immigration, to opt out of the EU's migration pact, this pact, ending Dublin, ending the sending back to the first country where they come in, and instead pay for other countries to show solidarity. It's agreed, it's signed off. I won't bore everyone viewing with the amount of votes and passes through different EU institutions it had to go through, but it got agreed. And that's meant to come into force in 2026. And the big question is how that implementation will happen and whether it will work, whether countries will pay for other countries to host migrants, whether they will agree to transfer people around the bloc. And the current things that have happened in the last couple of weeks, the borders going up in Germany and other countries. Sweden is alleged to potentially be agreeing to take on some of that money and then pay the asylum seekers themselves to get out of Europe.
Yeah,
that's one of the suggestions that might happen.
Up to $34,000 US, apparently. A phenomenal amount of money per person.
So,
maybe I should move to Sweden and go
there's just loads.
But this is just what people people are doing. Yeah.
You won't get it.
Yeah, it's not going to work.
It's not going to work, no.
Jack, one thing, we have someone in chat who just congratulated you for becoming a Belgian citizen, so I just wanted to pass that message along.
That is very nice.
It's very...
I mean, you are speaking...
The truth is...
You're speaking to quite a table of migrants here, by the way. Obviously not you. You're not one. Dustin's definitely not. But some of us are. Migrants
I am.
Here. You are. You are.
Definitely
am. OK, so we're all in it with you, Jack, except for you're better than us because you've been naturalised. So that's very good. Congratulations.
But the truth is, the process is really difficult, even for a European. It took me a lot of paperwork, loads to go through. And I am not a person in desperate need of protection in this country, right? That's the truth of it. I'm an economic migrant, a person that came into this country to choose to work here. And so it gets really complicated about the philosophies and how people feel about, Tom was talking about this before, about if you are somebody who lives in East Germany in a small town, and you want your town to remain German and to not have migrants there, and often don't see that many migrants, versus people that live in the cosmopolitan capitals of Europe who've grown up seeing, Muslim women walking through their streets for most of their lives and feel comfortable with that. it's also about how people feel living in their places. And that's why it's always so instrumentalized politically, I think.
Thank you, Jack. Just sticking with this, trying to come up with a solution, is there anything that you think that may move this debate forward in a positive way?
I'm glad you asked Jack first, because it gave me a bit of time to reflect. There is one thing that I think the focus should also be on maybe the medium to long-term solution to this. Obviously, it's not something where the focus for politicians today will be. They want solutions now to the situation now. But if the focus is also on maybe working on a medium to long term with some of the countries where those migrants come from, in trying to build institutions there, in trying to tackle the root causes of migration, then it probably won't solve the immediate issue. People will still come to the European Union, but it could help to solve the issue further down the road. I'm not saying that the governments in Europe are not tackling also the long-term issues. To a certain extent, they are. One concrete example, the Sahel Alliance. So several governments that's led by Germany are working with countries in the Sahel to basically help, especially young people, get education there so that in the long term, they do not necessarily need to move away from the region. It's a massive endeavor. It's a massive challenge. Probably a lot more money, a lot more efforts are needed, but it's at least a way forward to tackle the situation down the road. And if the focus is not only on how to make sure that the migrants that are arriving today at the border or tomorrow at the border or the day after tomorrow at the border are either allowed in or kept out, but the focus is also maybe kept, or at least the focus is also on how we could solve the problem down the line in 5 years, in 10 years, to make sure that maybe Afghanistan is a safer place, or Syria is a safer place, or Sub-Saharan Africa is a safer place. Then the problem could be reduced in the long term. Much more is needed, but at least it's, from my perspective, from my own view, vision, if you will, that is worth at least considering.
Thank you. Do you have any points that you want to say?
You know, we have one user just, I think, reflecting on the conversation that it will be important to have dedicated policies to handle asylum seekers and attract skilled labor. On the other hand, these are very different topics that cannot be addressed with the same measures. And if that's your takeaway, I think that, you know, this conversation around the table has been productive for you. So thanks for that comment.
Let me just ask you before we stop discussing this. The question was, will the migration dispute break up the European Union? Thomas?
No. Do you want me to explain?
Briefly. Briefly, you can explain why.
The 2015-16 crisis, which was also a migration crisis, was also very difficult. And we were already then talking about, will this break the European Union? I firmly believe that the European Union is stronger than the problems it faces. I strongly believe that the achievements of the European Union are stronger than the problems that it might face. Yes, it's a challenging time. Yes, it's a very difficult time. Yes, the European Union will have several problems to deal with, but I do not think that the European Union will be broken by this migration crisis.
Thank you. Jack, what do you think?
Following on from what Thomas is saying, completely agree. The reason that people are trying to migrate into Europe is because they see it as a safe place, a prosperous place to bring their families. And a large part of that is because of the countries that are in the European Union that gain prosperity and security through being in the EU. So it's a bit of a paradox, but it doesn't seem to lead to the end. It could lead to the more restrictive borders, harder border policy, but it's not going to end the European Union, this issue.
OK, Jack, thank you very much. And thanks very much for being with us throughout this stream. We've really appreciated having all your expertise and knowledge on it. So thank you very much. Very quickly, Jared, you've got the poll results.
I do have the poll results. So we asked you, how necessary are border checks to keep Europe safe? Essential at all times, make little difference, they're OK if temporary. Essential at all times came out on top with 60%. People thought they made little difference, 22% of the people thought that, and OK if they're temporary, 16%.
60%, yeah. So as you know, talking from a German government perspective and what they've done, what do you think about that? 60% is a high number.
It is a high number, but correct me, Jared, if I'm wrong. It will be permanent.
Yeah, exactly. Essential. So we have one number, 60 and 16. So 60 believe it's essential at all times, and 16 okay if they're temporary.
Well, from the German perspective, it would be then 16 that would agree with the measures, because there's 60 permanent at all times.
Which would not agree with the EU at all.
Correct.
So that would not sit well.
Wow. Yes.
Fascinating. Thank you so much, Thomas. We've really
It's
enjoyed
great.
having
I'm
you.
happy to be here.
It's lovely to have you. Just
very informative,
It's just brilliant. Thank you to all of you around the table. Thanks so much to everyone who's been with us in the chat. Thanks for your questions and your comments.
Absolutely. And stay tuned. Watch the community tab on YouTube to find out the topic of conversation for next week. We usually post it about 24 hours before the start of the stream.
Yeah, thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.